typing now, and I'm gonna tweet this now. And hopefully people can hear us. Can one of you talk for a second?
Testing.
Talking,
1, 2, 3.
talking.
Yeah.
Okay, it's good. It's good.
Is there a keyboard shortcut for the mute, Jeff, or no?
I don't think there is a keyboard shortcut. At least I don't know of one. You can, but if you click the little microphone.
Yeah,
Scott,
I got it.
Scott, are you like
Where's the
adjusting your
bullet?
microphone by any chance?
Maybe, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm responding to a DM, so I think
Okay.
I probably jostled it.
All right, no worries, no worries.
His Twitter machine is directly on top of the mic.
Hey,
Got one of those new Blue Yeti tweet boxes.
Yes.
yeah.
It's held together by duct tape, and I have a gerbil on a wheel that's powering it.
Hey, Scott, do me one last. So now I'm seeing Scott's levels are like peaking almost. Are you seeing this?
No,
Jeff?
dude, don't stress.
All right.
Don't look at Zencaster.
Okay.
Do not pay no attention to the man behind the screen.
Yeah, the keyword is Zen.
Yeah.
From the Zencast.
It's not Chaos Caster.
All right, here we go then. Let's begin. So I'll count it down, and then it'll be basically like we've just played the trailer for Capone. Okay.
Yeah.
So in 3, 2, 1. That was from the trailer for Capone, the newest film written and directed by Josh Trank. Joining us today for our review of Capone, he is the managing editor of Birth Movies Death, as well as the co-host of the King Cast, Scott Wampler. Welcome to the Slash Filmcast for the first time. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm living the dream. Thank you for having me.
So, Scott,
yeah.
Congrats on the launch of your new podcast.
Yeah. That's been going better than we imagined.
So tell us about the Kingcast.
Well, about a year ago, my colleague Eric Vespi, formerly of Ain't It Cool News and now a full-time freelancer, he invited me out to lunch and pitched me on the idea of this show that is essentially it's kind of a combination book club / movie review show in that each episode tackles a specific Stephen King adaptation. So we cover the original text, be it a short story or a novel, as well as the resulting film or TV show or limited series, what have you. And the hook to the whole thing is that we let our guests choose whichever adaptation they want to talk about.
Very cool. And I think you have a pretty cool first guest for your first episode, right?
Yes. Our first episode went live earlier this week with Kumail Nanjiani. Kumail went with The Running Man after a lot of back and forth. He originally wanted to come on and do it with his wife Emily Gordon, but she's got her hands full with this thing she's working on for Netflix, and neither one of them had the time to reread a 900-page book. So then he was kicking around a few other ideas, but ultimately he landed on The Running Man, and we were super excited because we were hoping somebody funny would pick that one, and we were thrilled that we could lead with that. And so far I think we've recorded half a dozen episodes, and we've got another 15 or so scheduled over the next month or two. Big guests. Some of the titles are curveballs. Some of the episodes are funny. Some of them are more serious. Kind of depends on the guest. Kind of depends on the property. But all of them are really fun to listen to. So we're excited to finally have it out there, and we think people are going to continue to enjoy it.
Well, very cool.
You got to get those guests are probably lining up to be early guests so they can use up all the short stories, you know?
Yeah, I would hate to be the person stuck with the stand, you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
There's so many short stories. Come on.
There's a ton.
Yeah.
Like if you go look up just Stephen King adaptations, there's like a list of them on Wikipedia, and it's a depressingly long list. We're going to be at this until we're very old men. But we figure that sooner or later we're going to run into an issue where a guest is going to say, I'll do it, but only if I can do this property. And it's something that we've already done.
Right.
When that happens, I think what we'll do is have them focus on a specific element of the adaptation that didn't get as much attention the first time around.
You've already thought through the sustainability of the podcast. I'm impressed.
Yes. We've been working on this for a year. You know, this is a thing that has we really put time into this thing, and
I wouldn't know
but-
what it's like to put time into a podcast. So, but I'm glad that this is now in the world. You can check it out wherever your podcast can be found. It's the King Cast with Scott Wampler and Eric Vespi. So, congrats on launch. But
Thank you.
let's talk about the film that we're talking about today, which is Stephen King-esque, dare I say, in terms
a
of
little
its
bit,
construction.
a little bit, yeah.
And I'll say that before we begin talking about Capone, that this is a movie that is very difficult to spoil, I would say. Not very much happens in this movie. And so
That's a good way to put it.
So I
Yeah.
think that there's not very much plot. It's not a very plot-driven film, I would say.
Yeah.
Um,
not much
It's not strong
dialogue.
on- It's not
Yeah.
strong on content or reasons to watch it or
So
Thematic consistency. Yeah.
takeaways.
yeah, so it's about Al Capone in the last year of his life, suffering from dementia, and so we'll just say right up top that we're probably going to give details from throughout the film, right near from the beginning of this review. So if you don't want to be spoiled on Capone, you don't think you're ever going to watch the movie, or I'm sorry, if you don't want to be spoiled on Capone, then just wait until you've seen it. But otherwise, I've seen a lot of people say that they're not going to watch the movie. They're going to listen to the review anyway. Just know that we're going to spoil it from right now. So, all right, let's get into it, shall we? Scott, I really enjoyed your review of this movie over at Birth Movies Death. What did you think
Thank
of
you.
Capone?
I loved it. I did not expect to love it. I thought I would like it because I had talked to some of our colleagues that saw it over the last couple of weeks, via screeners or whatever, and people kept coming to me and saying, "You specifically are going to love this movie," and I didn't know how to take that. But I had enough people who know my tastes and know what I kind of respond to in terms of film that I was pretty sure I was at least going to like it. But I genuinely loved it, and I thought it was really interesting and a breath of fresh air after some of the bullshit I've been watching in quarantine.
Do you mind sharing like what some of that bullshit is? Because when I read your review, I get the sense that you are not a fan of some middle of the road, not super ambitious efforts that you've been consuming lately.
Well, I don't want to play the game of I saw this and this is better than that.
Right. Okay.
Because they truly are apples and oranges. I could name films, but I think that I've seen recently that I just didn't like. But it's sort of an apples and oranges situation, and I don't think it's fair to the filmmakers. But I'll just say that I've been watching a lot of Netflix originals and catching up with titles that I didn't bother with the first time around when they were in theaters. And a lot of what I've been watching is just like, that's okay. But that's also my reaction to many movies, and it's why I don't really like reviewing movies. Is that as much as I love film, I find the vast majority of movies to just be, that was pretty good. It takes something very specific for me to be like, oh my god, and so this, I don't know if I would have reacted to it as strongly if I hadn't been locked up in my house for the past 2 months. But I do know that I genuinely appreciated what they were going for here, and I think that he pulled it off.
Yeah, I definitely relate with what you're saying about most movies just being pretty good, right? Especially after doing this for 12 years. I actually think we're lucky if we have a stretch where you watch a bunch of movies that are pretty good, so that tells you about what happens the rest of the time. But I would also say, Scott, you said you might not have appreciated it as much if you hadn't spent the last few months locked up. But I would actually say, for me personally, I don't know about you, but having done this podcast now for over a decade and reviewing movies every week, if I hadn't done that, like in an alternate universe where I hadn't been doing that, maybe I would also not appreciate this movie as much, right? Which is to say that because we watch a movie, at least a movie a week, when something is very different from the thing we typically watch, it's notable. It's just for the novelty's sake.
It makes you feel something.
It makes you feel something. It makes you feel something.
Exactly.
And
exactly
that's what happened with me when I watched this movie. I basically read your review, Scott, and I just thought like I agree with pretty much every single word in this review. So I really appreciate the movie as well. But Devindra, tell us what your reaction was to Josh Trank's Capone.
Oh, I hated this movie. I hate everything about this movie. It feels to me like a student film. And it feels like at some point Josh Trank, I've read like Matt Patch's excellent, very long post about him, the post disaster artist over at Polygon. Like that story was 4 years in the making. So go check that out.
Incredible.
Maybe we should talk a little bit about that actually before we get into this.
Because that's the history. That's the context leading up to this movie. Yeah.
Right. So, like an extremely abridged version of the story, and you guys can bring up any relevant details, is that Josh Trank made a movie called Chronicle.
Which I
think the
I think we
budget
all
of
can
that
love.
movie
Yeah.
was
Such a
about,
cool movie.
about $12 million. The movie grossed over $100 million internationally, and then the offers started rolling in. I mean, he's directing a superhero movie, Fantastic Four. He's directing a Boba Fett movie, one of the most for some reason respected characters in all of Star Wars. And so, can you imagine being in your 20s, right? And then like all this stuff just starts pouring in. It is a lot to take in, right? And he had a difficult time handling it. Is really what it comes down to. And the Star Wars thing, he's basically removed from that project. Fantastic Four was basically a disaster. From what I could tell from the article, the movie was taken away from him. Like control was taken away from him in terms of the edit and final cut.
The context of that though is that he wasn't making the movie, so it's like they were trying to finish the movie. Like, dude, we need a script. We need endings. Like, we need stuff, and he wasn't doing it, so the studio had to do it. So yeah.
So good call out there, Devindra. And then he's basically been kind of incubating this Capone movie for years in the time since then. And this was kind of like the fact that he was able to get together a budget for this. The cast is awesome for this movie.
He's back, baby.
All right, this is kind of his re-entry back into the world of directors. And yeah, so all that said, if there are any other relevant things for this conversation, feel free to bring them up throughout. But given that, I think you were rooting for this to be good, right, Devindra? Isn't that right?
I mean, I want every movie to be good. And I think the running joke is I tend to like more things than you guys do, or at least be a little more I don't know, a little more charitable to bad movies or like middling movies. And to me, like, this is a movie I hate for a lot of reasons, because it is a miserable experience for the audience, for, I don't know, the actors themselves. I feel like Tom Hardy just loves putting himself in these things, though. Like, this is another Venom-esque situation for him where, he doesn't have a good script or much to work with, but he can be, he could just be absolutely insane. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going on in his head, but I feel like Tom Hardy had fun. I did not have fun watching this movie because it is, this is a really interesting subject. Al Capone suffered from neurosyphilis for most of his life. It ate at his brain. The things you could do with that concept. And let me tell you, the drunk history segment, it's 4 minutes long, starring Joe Latruglio, is a better movie than this movie in terms of like exploring the insanity of, Chicago's greatest mob boss literally being an idiot because his brain was eaten away by an STD. And this movie doesn't do anything with that except it tries to like explore the internal, I don't know, workings of Capone and the guilt he faces from the, terrible things he's done. It tries to go weird in a lot of ways, and I feel like some of those segments, those are what feel like student film things for me. Like, it feels like, oh, if I had 5 minutes for my thesis film, if I could create like a crazy dream sequence to show me what was going on in Al Capone's mind in his final year, that would be interesting. I don't think it's interesting as a nearly 2-hour movie. It's at least over 90 minutes. It's a very long movie, but I don't feel like there's much connecting me to this thing. And let me tell you guys, I love movies. I love slow plotting movies where not much happens. Like, that can be my jam.
Yeah,
and
you're a big Patterson fan, for instance, right?
Well, I love Patterson. I love Jim Jarmusch in general. Like, I will go to bat for The Limits of Control, which is a messy, messy movie, but has so many things I enjoy. This movie has nothing. It really has nothing. It has Tom Hardy being crazy. It has Linda Cardellini being just kind of wasted. And we talked about what was it, Dead to Me season 2, where she is so good. She is such a good actor, and this movie just completely erases the life from her and kind of what she does. So here's the thing: I also love movies about terrible people doing terrible things, and I'd look at like Vox Lux or Her Smell, two movies about very, very grating, hard to like people that I think explored some interesting themes
Did you
and
like those
gave
movies,
us.
Devindra? You're a fan?
I think they're interesting. I
Yeah.
wouldn't say I didn't love Vox Lux, but I think it's an interesting movie that does a lot. Whereas this one just feels completely uninterested in telling me anything, like in actually exploring anything other than, Josh Trank had this trippy idea for an Al Capone dream sequence at one point and decided to make a movie out of it. So yeah, I didn't have much, really positive things to take away from this movie. I will say it does feel like the perfect quarantine movie because this movie is basically Al Capone trapped in in his house, just shouting at demons and imaginary, agents and whatnot. We are all Al Capone wearing diapers, shitting in our beds. That's my takeaway.
I think that's a little dismissive,
Yeah.
and in two pretty key ways. One of which is, why would someone even make this movie to begin with?
That's a good question.
You have an iconic American gangster, with a storied history, and you've chosen to, and by you I mean Josh Trank, not you, Devindra.
Yeah.
You didn't make this movie, as far as I know. You've chosen to build a whole movie around the year in his life where he was basically, just feeble and sitting in a chair, and what's going on in his head. I think from the get-go, that's interesting. Like, why would anybody do this? And the fact that Josh Trank, of all people, did this, I find doubly interesting. Like, after everything he's been through in the past 10 years, some of which was quite obviously, that's his fault, the way he reacted to things. I think that for him to have gone through that, and he comes out the other side of it and says, okay, here's my next project. It's going to be Tom Hardy as Al Capone, and you're not going to understand half of what he's fucking saying half the time. And he's just going to have these hallucinations. I think that's fascinating. And then
give me more hallucinations though. Like if you're gonna go crazy, go crazy. If we're gonna go nuts, let's go nuts.
Okay, I hear you on that
Yeah.
point, and I could have used even a little more surreality to it. But also, this wasn't $100 million movie. I'm sure that they were constrained by whatever they were working with. So
David Lynch doesn't need a huge budget to give us surreal, right? He will give us
No,
a
that's fair.
room with a single chair and freak us the hell out. Like that's really what I'm getting at. Like if you're gonna go crazy, go all the way.
The Lynch comparison is very good, though.
But-
The cinematographer on this movie is a cinematographer that frequently works with David Lynch.
Yep.
So I did feel it honestly reminded me quite a bit of Twin Peaks: The Return. Like the look of this movie. But Jeff Kanata, I got to ask you, what did you think of Capone?
Well, Dave, I guess my thoughts about Capone are best summed up in the form of a limerick.
Jeff has a voice box.
Yeah. Are you ready?
So maybe we should explain the limerick thing to Scott, who may not be aware of it.
Short story is Dave is a monster, and he
Understood.
rules this podcast with an iron hand. He forces me every week to come up with a limerick. I don't want to do it.
Sure.
It's a lot of work. It is exhausting. And Dave says if I don't do it, he will leave the podcast. I'm doing it to keep him on the show. So actually,
It seems to me like Dave is creating an aggressive and hostile work environment, and that this is bullying. And frankly, Dave, you're canceled. I'm sorry. It's happened.
Thank you. Finally, someone's speaking truth to power.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? We don't have an HR department at Slash Filmcast, or I would have reported this long time ago.
Let's see the limerick, Jeff.
I actually have two this week.
What?
Two. All right, here's the first one. Sometimes when you are a critic, you have to ask what analytic gets a movie greenlighted. Were they really excited for Capone dying syphilitic?
Yes.
Pretty good.
Amazing.
Yes.
That was great.
I've changed my mind. Dave is uncanceled. I think this is an excellent policy.
No, it's all going wrong. All right, here's the second one. If a guy is historically known as a gangster and all that you've shown is the poop and the piss from the syphilis, you can't call your movie Capone.
Jeff, this is some of your greatest work of all time. I think.
Rhyming syphilis is difficult.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's
It
truly
did take me a long time. Like I
a
said,
work,
Dave
yeah.
is a slave master.
Yeah.
It's what my grandmother always used to say.
Rhyming syphilis is hard.
Yeah. Strange woman. Strange woman.
So
life
I think
advice. Yeah.
first of all, if it wasn't already made very clear, I'm on Team Devindra on this one. But I want to say also, the second limerick is a side thing, but it's very important to me. It really ticks me off when the biopic. This is the same issue I had with Lincoln. You can't call your movie Lincoln if you're talking about like 2 weeks of his life. You know, your movie isn't Lincoln; it's Lincoln. No, this isn't the.
Well, you can like explore themes. You can explore a person through a sliver of their life. Like that is
okay.
That's done in a
I
lot
would
of ways.
way prefer 2 weeks of Lincoln's life than like a movie that attempts to tell his whole life. I think those movies are terrible, in my opinion.
I just feel like if you call that movie, you know, the ratification of the what. Just
yeah,
give
that
me
sounds a lot
title.
better. Who are the marketing geniuses that came up with Lincoln?
I don't know. I don't know if you know this, but Capone wasn't the title of this movie. It was
I know.
Fonzo.
Yeah.
And I think Fonzo is, man, what if a movie is called what that title
Points to the
communicates?
bonkers, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think Fonzo is a way more appropriate name for this
Yes.
movie.
Yes.
And when it was in production, everyone was like, "Oh, why is it called Fonzo? That sounds stupid." But like now that you've seen it, it's like, "Oh, well, that makes perfect fucking
because
sense."
the movie is stupid. I get it.
No.
No,
I think it's taking the piss out of Capone to call it Fonzo, and I think it communicates the Capone is a name with power to it, right?
Right.
You know, like that's an iconic name. There's only one Capone. You know, Fonzo sounds like a movie about a Muppet.
Yeah,
you know,
the cross
and that's
between
sort of
Fozzie Bear and Gonzo. Yeah,
and that is what Capone is reduced to in this movie. So I think I do agree with you that Capone is the wrong title for this movie, but I think that if it were called Fonzo, it might serve as a warning to what you're about to watch.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it would be a better title. Anyway, that's kind of my little pet peeve about biopics that are just like, hey, here's a day in his life. It's the name, you know. I don't know. Anyway, overall, I will.
But
say,
also, don't you? I'm sorry to interrupt again, but also, don't you think that? Isn't it? I don't know. I find it more interesting when a biopic kind of centers in on a specific event, because what I find with standard biopics is they all follow the same goddamn formula every time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which
Walk
Hard pretty much ruined.
Yeah,
that's not a fault of the title.
I was gonna say, like, it's so prevalent that they were able to make Walk Hard, which is a parody of that formula. And
Scott, I think Jeff is just very specifically ticked off at using the name in the title. He doesn't care about what you're saying. It's just literally the name in the title that bothers him.
It feels
But
like
I kind of agree with him on this, though. Capone is just the wrong title for this
If
movie.
I picked up a book that was called Lincoln, I would want to know all about Lincoln. If I picked up a book, if I rented a movie based on the title and it said Capone, I wouldn't expect to be required to know who this dude was in order to understand the movie. Like, you know what I'm saying?
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
This movie does not explain who Capone is in any way. You know, you have to have back knowledge even to understand the context of this movie. But that's not even the thing that pisses me off about this movie the most. That was just a side little thing. It got a second limerick. Okay. Here's what I really think about this movie. It's totally exactly the same as Devindra. And I really am glad, Scott, that you like it. I am. I would never yuck anybody's yum. I'm glad that you dig it. But it seems to me, in hearing you, that what you like about it is all a meta story that really isn't the movie.
No, that's an element of it for sure. That makes it interesting to me to begin with. But I also genuinely thought that there's some great filmmaking on display here.
I agree.
There's some truly impressive work here that it sometimes verges into the nightmarish. Look, you don't make a movie that we can sit here and say, yeah, it's kind of Lynchian, and have that not be something.
Yeah, yeah.
There's something
I
something
disagree.
elemental going on here.
I think this movie is not anything. I don't think it. I took nothing away from it. I will tell you, I am a huge fan of Tom Hardy. He's in two of my favorite movies of all time, Fury Road and The Revenant. I think his work is frequently brilliant. At no point in watching this movie was I not watching someone acting. At no point did I ever think of Capone as a person, or that I was watching a portrayal of a person. At no point. I watched Linda Cardellini and thought, hey, that seems like a person. In fact, most of the other people in this film seemed like people that were in situations. And the lead of this movie was a Muppet. It was a cartoon. There's at no point did I ever buy that I was not looking at a person under makeup doing a goofy voice. I think that performance, or how it was shot, or whatever you want to say, is a complete failure. It fails on the most fundamental level of suspension of disbelief. At no point was I curious about what this person was going through, all because I never believed it was anything other than a kind of a dumb show. It was just this kind of goofy thing from the start. And I like when actors take big swings. I think, there are fascinating performances that are outside the box and weird. And I praised what he did in Venom. Like, it made the movie interesting. It's kind of goofy and weird. But this to me just undermines the fabric of the movie. And the fabric wasn't particularly well sewn anyway. There, as you said, Dave, nothing really happens. I don't understand why I'm watching any of this, what I'm supposed to take away, other than, dementia is rough. I truly don't understand what this movie is attempting to communicate to me.
I interpreted Capone himself as a symbol, and that what's being communicated here is the idea of almost like the implosion of the American dream is happening here. You're watching this guy who had it all. He was ruthless. He stepped over wherever he had to get there. Killed a lot of people. But he's living in this big mansion. He had all the power and money and excess that you could want, and this is where it got him. And to me, I do think the movie is taking the piss out of Capone a little bit, and I think it's also saying something about that. And if you watch this as a surface level thing, I can imagine not liking it. But I also think, like, this is just not a movie for most people. I think that 70% of the people that watch this movie aren't going to like it. But I think that people that are on this very specific wavelength, that do like watching Tom Hardy in Gonzo mode, and do appreciate the more intangible aspects of what's happening here. I think it's the people I've talked to that enjoyed it really, really, really liked it. Most of the people that not anyone I know except for you guys and some of the people on Twitter, were so vehemently against it. It's a wavelength movie. You're there, you're not. And so
in your review, Scott, you brought up a couple of other great examples of movies like this, where it's extremely polarizing. One of them is Darren Aronofsky's Mother.
Yes.
Which is also not for everyone.
Which I loved.
And another one, Jeff Kanata, is The Counselor, which is a movie that you also loved, and the entire world seemed to dislike as well.
Yes. I love The Counselor.
This is a lot of people's The Counselor, Jeff.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Like I said, I would never yuck anybody's yum, and I'm glad that someone got something out of this. I think it sounds to me like it's a very charitable. You're giving a gift to the movie to say to walk in with interpretations that are mined from the meta level. It's saying, oh wow, this must be about Josh Trank, and all the information that I have about him Like you
No, I
bring
don't.
that.
Yeah,
I
again,
mean, I
it's
think you're
not solely
overstating.
that. It's not solely
Yeah,
that, but yep.
I think you're overselling my observation there.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And also, I do approach movies in a way where I'm taking a lot of shit into context. I watch a movie a day at least, usually two. I see a lot of shit. You know, I know an interesting movie when I see one, and this one just interested me. Um,
Fair enough. I
and,
listen.
and I
I'm not
also
trying
think,
to.
and I also think it's ironic that you say that, that I may be being overly charitable by coming to the table by having this meta read on it, which is very minimal to my overall opinion of the movie. But I also think that there's maybe a little element, and maybe not anyone in this room or on this Zencast, I should say. Um, but I do feel like I read some of the negative reviews, and they were so overstated and
Yeah.
so
Vicious.
hyperbolic.
Vicious.
Yeah, I don't want to be the guy that's like, some of these guys kind of had the knives out for this thing before they saw it, huh? But there's also, I read a couple reviews where I don't know how you come up with that review unless there wasn't some of that going on there. Because
I,
Well,
I
I will
can
tell you.
kind of
I will tell
I
you that
can see that though. But yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say what Dave said. I think to Devindra applies to me. I was very much rooting for this movie. I'm rooting for Josh Trank. I think it would be amazing to have this dude come
Yeah.
back and
Yeah.
be great. Because I
Sweet.
did like
Yeah.
Chronicle. I did like Chronicle, and I was so excited for that Fantastic Four movie. I didn't think that he could make something I would like less than that, and then he did. I was very much rooting for this movie to be great. In fact, I think I was one of the people that was pushing for us to review it because I was hoping that it would be awesome. I thought the
Yeah.
cast was amazing. Tom Hardy as Capone. Yes, sign me up. Uh, I found it to be just completely lacking of any substance whatsoever. It's a psychological trip into a mind that is damaged, but to what end? And it brings up all of these things and just completely has no interest in following through on any of them. It doesn't seem to hold together. Maybe I am just undereducated in movies or whatever, but I took nothing from this that seemed I kept searching for something to hold on to. At a certain point, the movie kind of raises like, oh, is he pretending to have dementia? Is it all a big act? And then just kind of abandons that idea. And then there's this like $10 million. Where's this $10 million thing? And then it isn't anything. The movie.
But I love that about it. I love that it introduces these plot threads, and you think like, yeah, your reaction as an audience member is to react to those as, okay, now we're hitting what the thread of this movie is going to be. And it does that a few times, like with the illegitimate son that appears to be, working with the
Right.
feds and the money and
And what are we
whether or
supposed to
not he's
get from
faking
that
it.
resolution? Like, what is that last scene? What is that? What are we supposed to? Is it some sort of redemptive moment for him? He does nothing to earn it. There's nothing. There's no progression between.
And
a
is it even
phone call-
real though? Is it
Right,
real?
right.
That's
It's-
the question. What
But
I'm
what are
what
we
I'm trying
supposed
to
to take away
communicate
from
is that I don't think you're somebody that came to this movie wanting to dislike it. You've convinced me as such, but I just don't think you're on this movie's wavelength, and that's fine. I this isn't a movie where like, okay, like Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah.
If you tell me Mad Max Fury Road is a bad movie, I'm just like, fuck you. And I know not to listen to any
This
of your further
conversation is over.
Right.
Yeah.
movie opinions. Like I was at Fantastic Fest one year, and someone introduced me to a sort of a film Twitter person. And this guy immediately launched into a spiel about how Tarantino can't direct his way out of a paper bag. And he was mid-sentence. I was like, all right, nice to meet you, and just walked away. Because it's like, what the fuck? Like, what do you even say to somebody like that? You know?
Yeah.
I don't think this is that kind of situation, and I respect that most people will not like it. It's unfortunate that you didn't, but I just don't think you're on the wavelength.
So what you're
I
saying,
don't think you're being petty. I
Yeah.
just want to communicate that.
Yeah.
I don't think you're just like, fuck this movie.
I think what I'm also trying to get across here too is that the wavelength for this movie is it is not in a place that I think is I don't think every movie needs to be accessible, but this movie
Right.
feels aggressively I don't know, mean or
Obtuse?
bleak or just like, I don't know, obtuse. Like, it feels like a movie, shitting on people and their expectations for Josh Trank or something. Like he doesn't want to give you something that you'd expect, and sometimes that feels like that's what he's shoving in our face.
It's
I
kind
don't
of
know.
mean spirited.
I
It's
Yeah,
kind of a
yeah.
mean spirited movie. It it shits on Capone. It does not care. It doesn't hold the audience's hand. It's it's not an easy watch. You know,
yeah.
Mhm.
So
I just respect all of that about a movie.
yeah,
I do.
I guess I really feel like the Twin Peaks comparison is good. By the way, the cinematographer is Peter Deming that I referred to
Mhm.
earlier, and also did I think Mulholland Drive as well. But so super talented guy, and really kind of makes this thing feel very surreal and eerie. I mean, I think if you like Twin Peaks: The Return, you're gonna like this movie, or at least you'll be in the set of people that might like this movie.
Yeah. Dave, I
The
love Twin Peaks: The Return.
The return,
So
the return is a great example though, because
yeah.
like I have a really good friend who uh could not get on board with the return because they thought it just looked cheap.
Hmm.
And all the special effects in it, which I would argue they look that way intentionally. I don't believe for a second
Mhm.
that David Lynch is doing something because he can't make it look better. You look at that, like episode 8 of that show, and
Yeah, episode
some of
8.
the like that's where he like unleashes it. Like
That's
he
the
knows what
black and
he's
white one,
doing.
right? Black and white.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. That's where my large goth sons, the Nine Inch Nails, appeared. Um, well, I mean, that's the high point of the entire series, but that episode proves that he knows when to employ impressive special effects versus when he wants them to look like when Laura Palmer's mom removes her face in that diner, and it looks kind of janky, but I would argue that was intentional for whatever reason. That's the piece of artwork that Lynch wanted to make. But this friend of mine, he just cannot get past this, and he's like, fuck the return, which is amazing to me that anyone could be like that. But I get it. That's also a really specific thing. And, either you're jiving with it or you're not.
So let me say a few thoughts on this movie. I overall really liked it as well. I think part of it is certainly a small part of it is the meta story with Josh Trank. That this movie, I think, in some ways describing what has like it's autobiographical in a way, right? Where he's been exiled and feels like he's going literally insane, and that's kind of the sense I got from reading the profile is that like this movie represents him in some way.
Or a
Uh,
warning to himself about what happens when you do achieve, that level of power.
yeah,
There's
it's
so
true.
many angles.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, it's all good. And the so my take on this movie is that this is kind of Josh Trank's The Irishman. And what I mean by that is The Irishman, like very mild spoilers for The Irishman, but in my opinion, is about the meta story is Scorsese reckoning with this idea of all these gangster movies that he's made, where yes, the official position of those movies, like Goodfellas and Casinos, is that crime doesn't pay. It's bad to be a gangster. Your life ends up in a terrible place. But the movies are so stylish and the actors are so charismatic that many of us can't help but feel drawn to these characters who are in fact despicable. And The Irishman, in my opinion, tries to remove that level of mythos. It tries to say, hey, remember that time that you really, that you were quoting Joe Pesci in Goodfellas? Well, like this is what happens to Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. Like this is what happens to those
Sure.
people is they all end
Sure.
up decaying in a nursing home, sharing stories of the glory days completely alone. And by the way, that's something that's revealed in the opening shots of the film. So I don't
But
consider it a spoiler.
here's how I feel about that example, though, Dave, because I've seen that written about a lot. And, there's a lot to say about The Irishman, but that is a movie that is engaging with those ideas and with those themes.
Oh
And
well,
to
hold on.
me,
Let me
yeah,
let me finish. Let me finish.
go.
I think that Josh Trank did not have the budget to accomplish something of The Irishman. He did not have $180 million or how much
I don't know.
this movie cost. No, because this is. I mean,
Mhm.
you're right that maybe he wouldn't have tried, right, if he had it. But
It's not just the budget. A lot of The Irishman's budget went to the CG, went to de-aging. You know, like if you could tell this story, much cheaper if you're doing more.
Well,
True serialism doesn't need a huge budget.
the point
That's
I'm
all I'm
making
saying.
though is that I like one of the great things about The Irishman is you get to see the rise and fall.
Sure.
And the rise is not nearly as glamorous as it is in Scorsese's other movies, right? When Robert De Niro
He's
is
a shipping truck guy.
yeah, when he's like executing people, it's really not
Definitely not as
exciting.
sexy.
Yeah, not sexy at all. But you don't even get the rise in this movie. You only get glimpses of his former glory in this movie. That's, I just think that, like it or not, it is definitely a choice. It's definitely like, we're not even going to show how exciting it was. But at the same time, I am very sympathetic to several of Jeff's points. Number one, I do think it's kind of, I agree with all you guys about the name. Like, I do think Capone's a bad name for this movie. It's going to set expectations incorrectly. It feels like it was like something a marketer came up with and not for the better. I think also that Jeff points to a distinction, a very important distinction between an actor playing a part and a person doing something, right? And like when you're watching either Tom Hardy pretending to be Capone smoking a cigar, or you're watching Capone smoking a cigar, and for most of the movie, I gotta agree with Jeff that like I never quite bought that he was this dude because it felt like such an affectation. The performance was for most of it, and that did hinder my ability to really fully immerse myself in this world because it's just. There was this channel, Screen Junkies, on YouTube, and I remember at the end of each year they give these awards out called the Screenies. And one of their awards one year was like most incomprehensible Tom Hardy performance. And they were just listing all the Tom Hardy performances, and you realize like, wow, like for many of his performances, he is speaking in a way that is very difficult to understand. The Revenant, Jeff mentioned, even like Bane,
Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, Dark Knight Rises, right? Dunkirk, he like was occasionally difficult to understand because he's shouting into that mask the whole time, and so it's definitely always interesting to see like what is this guy gonna do next? And I think that some of it works for me, but like particularly, I would say the wordless parts work for me. I would say actually when he has those like contact lenses that show his eyes super like bloodshot and such, and you just see him like there's an amazing sequence that is gonna haunt me forever, where he goes into he's having a stroke. The character's having a stroke, and he kind of flashes back to a party where Louis
The
Armstrong
ballroom
is
scene?
singing- I'm sorry, what?
The ballroom scene?
Yes, ballroom scene.
Oh,
yeah.
Jesus, that's so good.
Incredible.
That whole thing.
Incredible sequence where it's haunting, and I mean the symbolism with the golden balloon is a little bit on the nose, but still, I mean it is a really well put together sequence, and
It's
I will
truly
say,
nightmarish. That's what a nightmare
yes,
feels
yes,
like.
exactly,
You know, that
exactly
whole thing.
right. And I do think that this is like there's times when I remember when we watched like Kill Bill Volume 1, right? And you're like, oh, I didn't know that Quentin Tarantino could direct good action, right? I didn't know he could direct a good action scene. And similarly, this has elevated my opinion of what Josh Trank is capable of. I mean, this guy has made Chronicle and the Fantastic Four and this, and I think this is a significant evolution in terms of what he is showing, like what
Absolutely.
he is able to convey.
Can I ask you a question, Dave?
Yeah, go ahead.
What is Capone or Fonz or whatever you want to call him? What is he wrestling with in those moments? What is
Guilt.
he going through?
Guilt,
Yeah,
anger. You didn't ask me. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
but-
no, but I think that's right. Yeah, the idea of like all the viciousness and cruelty that this is. But you're pointing to
That's
one of
what
the
the
problems.
torture. That's what the torture.
Yeah, the
scene
torture
is
scene.
about.
But this is one of the problems of the movie. This is what I'm saying. Like because the movie doesn't really do a good job of showing the quote unquote rise, even via flashbacks. You get it's really hard to understate how big of a deal Capone was in the time. And I agree with you. It frustrates me whenever a movie requires you to bring pre-existing knowledge in order to enjoy the movie. And I do think that this to some degree does that.
I don't even think you need to see the rise. Here's the thing, and I'm gonna reject your definition of a biopic a little, Jeff, because I think Lincoln is a great movie, and I think you can make great
I think
biopics.
Lincoln's a
and
great movie
explorations.
too. I would never said Lincoln
Again,
wasn't a
it's
great
not
movie.
about the movie. Jeff
Yeah.
just doesn't like that it was called Lincoln. So
I
because
specifically brought up Lincoln
oh
because
man,
Yeah.
I
okay,
specifically brought up Lincoln because it's a great movie with a misleading title.
Yes,
That's-
okay,
that's-
so
okay.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I do. Yeah, nitpicking about titles is movies are a lot more than that. But I look at a movie like Steve
Obviously.
Jobs. So why are we spending 15 minutes yelling about a
It
title?
was a side thing
If
that I
it's so
brought
All right,
up.
let's
obvious.
move on. Let's move on.
Christ.
Jeff.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Like, come on, come on. It means something. But I also think of a movie like Steve Jobs too, where it's you're sort of seeing a rise, but it's also like a very slim window into that man's life and his psychology and how everything is happening. I get the idea and the explorations of regret, and I think these sort of like weird dream sequences are the best part of this movie, but they're not enough for this movie. Like if you're gonna hinge on that, give me some sort of weird exploration like that. I was just asking for a little more. That's all.
So Scott, I think that this is one of the weaknesses of the movie, in my opinion, is that like I actually wish it was a little bit more about this idea of, hey, this is a guy who was one of the largest figures ever in the history of, I guess you could say, well, not mankind, but certainly in the United
Yeah.
States, right?
In American crime.
In American
Yeah.
crime, right? Like legend in American crime.
Yeah.
And this person theoretically must be wrestling with a lot of demons, particularly towards the end of his life when he's going insane. I don't think the movie does a particularly good job of conveying that. Yes, there's a torture scene, but I kind of wish you had gotten a better sense of all the totality of the terrible things he needed to do to get to where he was, and B, his opinion on them. Because I think you get a sense, like there is some level of regret with this torture scene, and regret with his son that he doesn't know, right? Because
Mhm.
for a variety of reasons. But I don't
Completely
know
made
that.
up character and thing, by the way, too, because we don't that's not historically true as far as we know.
Right.
So it's like it's adding these things to add these elements, but I don't know if that quite works. 'Cause we
exactly. So I don't think it's
yeah.
quite enough to work on a basic narrative level. Like Capone is haunted by the ghosts of his past,
Mhm.
and therefore that's what the movie is. I think that the movie works best as a dare I say tone poem, or
Mhm.
Yep.
like just a series of haunting scenes.
The movie I kept thinking of while watching it was Pablo Larraín's Jackie.
Oh man.
In the sense that, well, first of all, the score sounds very similar to
Yeah. Yeah.
Micah Levi's score in that, and man, LP knocked it out of the park. God damn. That guy and Trent Reznor should do a little work together.
That would be interesting. Yeah.
It sounded like Jackie to me, and it was so unconventional in its portrayal of an iconic character, and not it doesn't give you it withholds from giving you the money shots from that person's
Mhm.
life,
Right.
and is dealing mostly with the fallout from those money shots, to use a very unfortunate phrase.
But Jackie's an interesting movie to bring up because I feel like every scene in that movie, every line of dialogue, every character, like every little bit of that movie is constructed in a way to bring you into, Jackie Kennedy's psychology. And to me,
Sure.
that's what's really interesting. And I feel like there's so much in this movie which is just like willfully not doing that. And I'll point to like the Matt Dillon character, who is the very stereotypical. He wasn't actually there the whole time. What's up with the introduction to
That
his
is
character?
so wild.
What-
That whole
what does that-
situation. So why introduce Matt Dillon's character having sex with someone
Yeah.
if he's not a real character? Like,
Is
it
he
just- it just is
imagining him?
the
Like,
most
what?
bizarre? Because basically, like, that is kind of a verite. It's very much like
Yeah.
you're watching
yeah.
this character having sex because, like, at the very basic level, he's a real character.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Like that's.
I think
'cause
it's seeding the idea that he is real when he is not.
right.
And I think that the movie, we're going back to the meta shit, but I think the movie is as much of an unreliable narrator as Capone's own mind. And I think that that's there to reflect that.
I do like how off kill, like that really set me off kilt, like really put me off balance when Matt Dillon's character is revealed to be not real, because my mind is flashing back like, well, what was the whole thing with him having sex then? Like, why?
Right.
Yeah,
Because you put in a scene like him having sex because it's like the implication is these characters they exist on their own timeline. They're doing their own things, and they have their life separate from the protagonist.
Yeah.
And then to introduce him that way and then reveal that he's not real is such a yeah. Go ahead. Is that Jeff?
No, it's me.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say the reveal where you see that Dylan is not actually there occurs like into like a minute or two into the sequence where Capone and his wife get in a big fight and he spits in her face. And so like my wife and I were watching this and we're sitting there watching, and then there's like it cuts to like a 2-shot and suddenly his chair is empty. I was like, wait, is fucking Dylan not real? And then like before you can even process that, you know,
it just confirms it.
Capone and his wife get into this like, you know, major fight, and that kicks another sequence. By the time Matt Dillon popped up again, I was like, oh yeah, like 20 minutes ago, like we didn't know whether or not he was real. Like I didn't have time to absorb that because of everything else that happened. But I think that's the movie keeping you off kilter.
Yeah.
I don't know. It sounds like I'm making apologies for it, or sort of, you know.
It just feels like you could do more with that character, because ultimately Matt Dillon's character ends up being like, I guess somebody Capone kind of liked and kind of trusted, and who was assassinated in a very brutal way. Like that's probably my favorite scene of just like the cross-cutting of the dinner and that crazy execution. Or no, it's not even cross-cutting because the execution happens before it. But there's this, I was thinking, it's like, man, is Matt Dillon the sort of like Capone in his prime? Is he the past self coming back and having a conversation with the dying self? And that's a way to bring in the legacy of the character and really explore it. And it ends up not being that. It ends up being the movie. I feel like I put my trust into movies, you know, and they can pull surprises. They can do all sorts of stuff. But the whole introducing him as a real character in a very stereotypical mob movie way, by the way, like it's a very, very pointed what they're doing. It's like, oh, that's the introduction to somebody on The Sopranos. You know, this new guy coming in. Look at what he's doing. He's so cool. He's taking a phone call right after having sex. It's amazing. But yeah, and then they go on a fishing trip, which there's
so was none of that real, right? Like, did he imagine
it's none of it's real? None of it's real, but it's also like, I don't know how much more to gain from those conversations and those scenes. Like, here's a really interesting character and a good actor. I think Matt Dillon can be great, especially as a like really polished counterpoint to a crumbling Capone. And it feels like they didn't really do much with it, and that kind of irked me as well.
Totally fair. Let me say one other thing about the movie that I really enjoyed, and I think we've been going for a while, so I think we can wrap up shortly. But I think that there is this brilliant scene in the movie with Linda Cardellini. It's like shot super close up on her face when she's kind of interacting with Tom Hardy's character, and they don't. She's trying to. You see the full impact of what he's saying register on her face. She's kind of weeping. She starts weeping because of what he's saying and the fact that he doesn't understand anything that's happening, right? Or he's just saying nonsense or things that are really hurting her. And that's one of the things that this movie does a good job of, I think, through that character is it shows you kind of the personal devastation that this character's actions have wrought. There's this amazing line earlier on. I apologize, I don't remember the exact line, but like, I think Kyle MacLachlan says something to her like, "Hey, you should make sure you keep another guy around the house in case he like hurts himself." And she's like, "You know, I've been waiting 25 years for peace and quiet. Like, I can handle him." And I just in that moment, you see and you feel the fullness of everything that character has gone through over the last few decades with this character.
Exhaustion.
Right. Yeah. And
she didn't have 10 years of quiet though when he was in prison.
I mean, I guess that's true, Jeff. Well,
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say life was never quiet for Al Capone's wife.
Yeah,
for one reason or
presumably
another.
he still continued to operate things while he was in prison. And
Yeah, for real.
So, yeah. So
and the feds were always probably fucking, screwing with him.
Yeah.
Who knows
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. But
That
She's
lady
just
did
waiting
not
for
have
him
that lady did not have a calm life.
Yeah,
At any
Ja-
she's
point.
in a way waiting for him to die, which
Right.
I also would have.
Absolutely.
Another thing. Let's explore that. Let's do more with that.
I thought the movie did a decent amount with that, but Jeff Kanata, I mean, what do you think of Linda Cardellini in this movie? Like, did you think that, with to the extent that this movie can be said to have any arcs at all, I thought that was a decent one. But what did you think?
I suppose. I mean, I think she's the most sympathetic, interesting character in the movie. I agree with Devendra that she's given complete short shrift here. She does almost nothing, and the movie. I mean, I don't know how much of the hour 40-minute running time she's on screen, but it isn't a lot. And I think she's great. I think she's a wonderful, wonderful actor, and I thought that character was fascinating. If this movie had been about Capone's wife,
yeah.
Amazing. Like, what is that life? What is that situation? You would wait around for 10 years. I honestly, this movie tells me nothing about how long they've been together, who she is, what her story is. She's got kids with him, but I guess there's this other, I don't even know what to make of her struggles other than that one line that you guys just quoted. Like, other than that, she seems to care a lot about him and want him to not have dementia, and he has dementia. Like, that's I'm struggling to get anything from this movie, and I'm really glad you guys seem to have, other than some stylistic exploration into madness, which is always interesting when you do it well. And I think there are some scenes that certainly are disturbing on a very visceral level. But other than that, I literally have no takeaways from this movie. I don't know what the point is.
Yeah. It's interesting that even Tom Hardy has done similar movies to this. Like I like this idea better when it was called Bronson. You know?
Yeah, Bronson's a disturbing
The
movie.
opening
Oof.
scene of Bronson like blows away like I think any of the surreal scenes in this movie, but
Yeah.
it's just weird to see. Like that's part of it too. It's like I feel like I've seen part of this before. So yeah, that stage and crowd scene was very nice, but it didn't impress me because it just feels like Josh Trank is cribbing on things he's seen before, like other great movies starring Mr. Tom Hardy growling and being, an angry evil man.
I just never saw Capone struggling with guilt. I never saw any kind of, like you said, Dave, there's no arc to any of it. It just seems like a loosely associated series of neuroses. Like, sometimes he's worried about his family. Sometimes he's worried about himself as a little kid. Sometimes he's worried about, I guess, some violence that he, condoned, or I don't know what the movie is trying to do.
I don't
It
think
seems like a
Capone.
shotgun blast.
I don't think Capone actually. How do I put this? This was my interpretation of it, and I'll grant that. I could be inventing things here, and this is just how I sort of absorbed it. But I don't know that Capone the person, and especially the Capone that's in this movie, I don't know if he ever felt guilt. But I think that was probably a choice where he pushed that back into his subconscious. And so in those scenes, like where he's watching the torture of the guy, and when he's quite clearly, confronting the violence of his past and all that rage, I think that that's sort of his subconscious breaking into the madness, and it's him confronting the guilt, but having never really dealt with it before, if that makes sense. And on a completely unrelated note, this is a question I want to ask you guys before we wrap up. Do you have any theories about the money? Because I have a theory about where the money was in this movie. I think the money is in the movie, the hidden money.
Really?
I think it's in that fucking statue. I think that's like, he knew it was hidden in that statue, and that's why he was so worried about them taking it away and don't lay a hand on it or I'll cut your head off. I kept waiting for the moment where they were going to knock that statue over and it was going to break open. It would be filled with like bags with giant dollar signs on them.
Yeah, the money that was never found in real life, but I think in a like weird fictional way, it would be funny to see them do something with that. Yeah.
My guess is that is what the movie was trying to communicate to us.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna talk to Josh tomorrow. I'm interviewing him, and one of my questions is gonna be, was the money in that fucking statue? Because I think it was.
It's interesting though, Scott, that of all the people on this podcast, you're the one that seems to like the movie the most, which is a movie that seems to not care at all about narrative conventions, and yet
No.
you are the one that has a theory about the money. Whereas, like, I guess my takeaway was the point is like we'll never like the point is we'll never know. It's like the ending of The Sopranos. You know, it's like that is part of the point is that the money was never important anyway because all these other things, whatever they are important. So
maybe not, but I think Trank's being cheeky with the statue. That's just this is a
completely fair
fan
interpretation.
theory. You know, this is basically fanfic that I'm doing right now. But
makes a lot of sense. There's
it makes sense.
Any other reason for him to be so weird about the statue? So yeah.
Also, that statue looked like a dick.
Yeah,
like it looked like I couldn't. At first I was like, does he have a giant dick statue in his yard? Like, is it like a virility thing? And then eventually they turn it around, and it's like,
I mean, to be fair, he has several giant dick statues in his yard.
He does. I just wanted to throw a shout out to the crazy shootout scene.
Yeah,
because
the final shootout sequence was so.
Oh
wild.
my god!
It was that was like that brought me to a place was like, oh, is this actually happening? Is he doing this? I know enough about him to know that this sequence wouldn't have happened in real life, but is the movie trying to tell me something by doing this? And even though that was all kind of happening in his mind, it was still like, that's interesting. Like, that's Capone taking action and doing something, and us like being on the edge of our seats. I wanted more of that from this movie, but at least we got a bit of that in the climax.
I don't think it will surprise anyone to say I thought that part was very distasteful. And it just felt like, oh, we're watching a guy with mental problems commit a mass shooting. It just felt ugh. But maybe that was
with a gold-plated Tommy gun. Pretty cool. If you
I
ask
love the
me.
idea that we're gonna gold plate the Tommy gun, but leave the bullets in it. that's how that wall works. It was something you definitely leave a magazine in that's useful and working.
Yeah. It was clearly a comment on Miller's Crossing and the amazing Tommy gun sequence from that movie. Clearly, that's
Also,
what we're getting at. It was his Rosebud, right?
As far as I know, that did not happen in real life. I don't.
No, it didn't. It didn't. It did
I tried
not.
to find
Definitely
evidence
did
that
not.
such an event occurred, and I'm like, I don't think that occurred.
I mean, this movie does.
I think
feel
if
like,
if Capone in real life went on a rampage in a mansion in Florida and gunned down like dozens of people with a gold-plated Tommy gun in his bathrobe and a diaper, definitely going to be high on the list of things people talk about.
It would have been in the news.
Yeah.
To be
That's
fair,
going
it
on
was,
the Wikipedia page.
It was revealed to be a dream sequence of the movie, but I just but that was the thing I was like, because I actually, for a project I had to do for work one time, I'd spent quite a bit of time studying Capone, and I'm like, I don't remember this happening. I feel like I would have read about this. You know?
It does feel like a movie written by somebody that read like a paragraph of an article one time and was like, oh, that's pretty fascinating. He had syphilis at the end of his life, and then just made up everything else. You know?
Well, no, he had syphilis for most of his life. That is the interesting story.
He got it at 15.
Yeah.
My man was in there knocking it down before he could even drive a car. And then
and the movie communicates that to you in text at the end.
Yeah. In text at the end. Meanwhile,
a move of the movie. It
doesn't matter. If I had known that from the beginning, it wouldn't make any difference to how I interpreted the movie.
Meanwhile, by the way, Drunk History managed to set up the whole idea that this like amazing gangster, like one of the worst criminals in U.S. history, was an idiot because he was suffering from this in many ways. Like, man, it's not just the last year of his life. That's why I would have liked to see earlier sequences with him of just like hints of this, of people saying like, what are you saying, Fonzo? Like, what's actually happening? I would have liked some more of that. But anyway, go watch the Drunk History sequence. It's great.
All right. Well, I think we can wrap it up there. That has been our review of Capone. Hey, actually, I do want to say one last thing. I thought the closing text was really weird. Because
you think that
usually
was weird?
You expect closing text generally has a format, right? Like it'll say it typically starts by referring to who the protagonist is, right? It'll say Al Capone died at the age of 48 shortly after the events of this movie, you know, or something like that, right? Like It'll say something about the protagonist and then talk about his loved ones or what.
Lincoln went on to get shot.
Yeah, Lincoln went on to get assassinated.
Yeah.
But this one just
now he's
started.
on your penny.
This one was kind of like it started like in media res, like the text was like in media res. It was like most of his friends and family. It doesn't even. There's no subject there. Like there's no proper noun. Just like most of his friends and families changed their names after. It's like it's just weird text. Anyway,
And
Just
then
weird.
I know you guys already hate me for even talking about this at all, but
Oh boy.
the and then it has that last title card where it's like Capone, which to me feels like, and now you know all there is to know about Capone.
yeah,
You know,
Jeff,
when
Jeff
you do the
really
last-
hates the title. I don't know if you guys can tell.
Yeah.
But-
I know. Okay, I'll shut up. I won't talk
Jeff is
anymore.
not mad.
You
Jeff
guys
is not
talk.
mad about the title. Yeah.
My Christ.
All right. Well, that's been our review of Capone. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Slash Filmcast. You can find more episodes of this podcast at slashfilmcast.com. Email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. Our theme song comes from adamwarrock.com. Our spoiler bumper comes from filmmaker Kyle Hillinger. This episode was edited by Beatty Zhang. Stay tuned to hear what we'll be discussing next week, although you already know. In the meantime, Scott Wampler, where can people find more of your work on the internet?
Birthmoviesdeath.com. I'm there daily. You can follow me on Twitter, though I wouldn't recommend it at Scott Wampler BMD. And you can follow the Kingcast at Kingcast19. And that show is available on most platforms you can find a podcast on: iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, blah 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 blah.
What was with the 19 there?
Oh, that's a Dark Tower reference.
I
The
see.
number 19 is very, very important to Stephen King's overarching mythology. That's just, that's for the fans, not the critics.
Yeah,
That
no. Totally,
Nice.
Yeah.
totally understand. And also, a guy named Christopher King, unfortunately, already claimed Kingcast without the 19 on Twitter.
There's a yeah, we saw that. There's a number of Kingcasts, and we went back and forth on the name for a long. There were months where we rattled off like so many different names, and then we were just like,
Yeah.
"Fuck it, we're going with the Kingcast. It's the perfect title." Sorry.
All right, Devendra Hardware.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Devindra. I write about tech at Engadget.com. I'm also co-hosting the Engadget podcast, so go check that out. I'm in the middle of reviewing all of Microsoft's new Surface devices, so go check those out. They're pretty cool.
How about you, Jeff?
I'm on Twitter at Jeff Kanata, which is spelled with 2 N's and 1 T, and I do several other shows, including a video game show called DLC, which you can find at 5by5.tv/DLC, a comedy science show called We Have Concerns. You can find that at wehaveconcerns.com, and my long-form Dungeons & Dragons play. It's called The Dungeon Run. You can find that wherever you get podcasts by searching for The Dungeon Run. You can find it on YouTube by searching for The Dungeon Run there, or you can watch it live as we record Wednesday nights, 6 p.m. Pacific time at caffeine.tv/The Dungeon Run.
Follow me on Twitter at Dave Chensky, that's Dave Chen SKY, and check out my other podcast, Culturally Relevant, wherever podcasts can be downloaded. Next week, we're actually going to be off for Memorial Day. We're going to take a break, and then we'll be back in 2 weeks with our review of Tampopo as originally promised. Thanks for sticking with us through the scheduling changes. But Scott, it was worth it just to get you on the show to defend Capone. So,
Thank you. I had a great time.
same. All right.
Anytime, guys.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you later. All right. So we're gonna
I'm gonna
keep.
stop. I'm gonna stop this
Okay.
recording.
Okay.
And then we got to download.
That way, that way he can go, Dave.
Got it. Okay.
Gotcha.
Because
Uh,
what would happen if he just left? Then like we
We'd
wouldn't
have
be
to
able
leave his
to.
computer on
then
until we
you,
were done.
I see.
Ah.
Oh shit. Okay.
Yeah, you are
Well-
out of show if that happens.
Yep.
Uh,
But it looks like we got everything.
yeah, mine went immediately to 100. So,
Yep, you're good. Yeah, I got it. All good.
well, thank you for having me, guys.
Thanks,
that was
Scott.
a good
That was
time.
Thanks, man.
Been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Good time.
Anytime.
All right. Let's do it again sometime.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
So Zencaster is doing this as MP3, Jeff. You can't do it as WAV though, right? I've seen that.
You
Before.
can do it as wave, yeah.
Okay.
But it's
Just for
takes,
that
like
extra
that's what he was talking about, where it's like, oh, you
Yeah.
have to sit around for 20 minutes because then it uploads
Yeah.
that entire
I
file.
see.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's the downside, I think. Yeah. 'Cause It's
But-
always better to work with WAV when you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't. Listen,
Yeah.
5 years of doing DLC with this software, I
Yeah, you sound
haven't had
good.
anyone
That's
ever
fine.
complain about the quality. So
Yeah, I mean, people didn't complain about the quality when we weren't using Zen, like we
Yeah,
weren't doing Wave,
yeah.
but now it's better now with the Wave.
So much better.
Well, we could do Wave-
Yeah, exactly. I think Wave is great for when it's just the three of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then maybe when we have guests, this seems like a decent solution.
Yeah, good call.
Or when we have people who can record their own audio, like if people already are versed in recording their own audio, like Patrick was on recently, he's able to record his own audio.
All right, I'm gonna start a
start
new
recording
recording.
again?
I will start a new recording now if you're ready. It's gonna, we're all gonna go away for a second and we'll come back.
Are you recording?
Not recording yet, but I just started a new session, which is what you need to do.
All right, let me know when you start recording.
But do you want to start now or take a break?
I'm ready to keep going.
Sounds
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. 1, 2.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast. I'm David Chen, and with me are
Devindra Hardawar.
And Jeff Kanata.
welcome to the show, everyone. Today on the podcast, we're going to be discussing what we've been watching and moving on into an in-depth review. Now, last week we had promised that we would be reviewing Tampopo, and many people told us they watched Tampopo and had a great time. And had a great time watching Tampopo.
Listen. Everybody who watched Tampopo won. Like you definitely won this week. It's an amazing movie. Cannot wait to talk about it. As I told Dave,
no
he
good
owes
deed
me
goes
noodles.
unpunished.
Yep.
So we will be talking about Tampopo, just not this week. So just hold on to those Tampopo feelings for the next episode of the Slash Filmcast. But we did not realize that when we said Tampopo, we did not realize that Josh Trank's new movie Capone was going to coming out on video on demand this week.
Yeah, the long-awaited Josh Trank revival, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all were very curious. Like, he made Chronicle, that was a great film. Then Fantastic Four was a terrible film, and so the question is, can this guy actually still make great films, right? And the movie Capone, I think, partially answers that question. So we are really excited to talk about that movie with guest Scott Wampler later on in the podcast. But that is what is in store. You can find more episodes of the show at slashfilmcast.com. Email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. Now, before we get to the show this week, I wanted to, I generally like to start the show by like checking in with folks, seeing how you're doing, seeing if there's anything new. I'll just say something that is a new habit I've developed this week, which is ripping movie commentaries.
Like a crazy person?
Putting them onto my iPhone and listening to them on my walks. Now, I don't know if you guys, this has changed for you guys, but I take like up to 3 walks a day now, like around my block. I know Devindra is not as feasible for you, but Jeff, I don't know what your walk schedule is like, but given
I've been a runner. It's a little unclear. Literally, the night before last, the mayor of LA issued a new decree about face masks at all times. So I don't know if I'm going to keep running because I don't particularly like the idea of running in a face mask.
Yeah,
so,
it's tough. It's not great.
Yeah, or I'll get some other mask that is one of those wicking fabrics. I don't know. We'll see. But yes, I have been running, but this is probably not very interesting, but I have stopped listening to anything when I run. I used to love audiobooks and podcasts when I ran, but I have completely stopped listening to anything while I run, and I just go out there with my thoughts. And so when I do a lot of work on the dungeon run and
like
just
your own
kind of,
personal podcast over here.
yeah, it's very meditative for me to be outside and alone and running. Sometimes
It's
I run
nice,
pushing my kids in the stroller or whatever, but I've stopped listening to anything.
It's interesting because my guess is you're probably just like very stimulated at all times, right? You got your kids, you got your job, and then
it's very rare to get any kind of quiet time with my brain, with myself, and so I need to get out of the house and moving, and I find it to be very meditative. It's actually time I cherish, and because of that, I'm telling people that are probably listening as they're exercising, it's like, don't listen to our podcast, which is never what I would want to say, but I find it very therapeutic, and it makes me actually find time to exercise more because I appreciate the time more and I seek it out. I'm like, I got to get out for an hour and run. So I can just have some peace.
I think we could all use some more like shutdown time, honestly, because
Yeah.
it makes me appreciate all the stuff like, oh, I can think, I can do other things. Being bored feels like something we've lost in a way, and that is a time where so much gets done. Like for me, if I just sit and think, even if I'm not outside, if I'm just laying down trying to meditate, my mind is still racing, doing a ton of things. So hey, listen to podcasts and listen to us, but also don't
Yeah.
sometimes.
Well, speaking of
Yeah.
that, I'm doing the exact opposite of that, which is so I've been ripping movie commentaries into audio files and listening to them on my walks.
How are you
And
ripping them, by the way?
you can if you can use ripping software to extract audio files off of the
Just
disc.
to get the audio file?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
gotcha. Mhm.
And the thing is, when it comes to movie commentaries, A, I love listening to them, but B, typically when that would come up, right? The opportunity to listen to an audio commentary is when the disc is in your is
Yes.
in the drive, like, or is in your Blu-ray player or whatever. Now I know like a lot of commentaries are on like the digital versions now, so like that's true.
Mainly iTunes. Like actually for what you're doing, Dave, like I really like buying iTunes versions just to put the commentary on and go for a walk and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
still
yeah,
playing on my
exactly.
phone.
That
Yeah.
that's a great way to do it as well. But yeah, I've realized that generally when I watch a movie, it's like that is the time where I least want to then rewatch that movie with commentary, right?
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
is also
Yeah.
the time when it is most convenient to activate the commentary. So there's then been all these commentaries on the discs I own that I have not listened to because I'll watch the movie on Blu-ray and I'll be like, oh man, that movie is so great. But I just rewatched it. Am I really going to now go back and rewatch it again with commentary? And the answer is generally no. So I've been ripping commentaries, putting them on my phone, walking around, listening to them, and most of them work really, really well. Now sometimes they'll refer to like, "Oh, that cut was awesome," and then it's like, "Okay, well, I don't know what he's talking about." But
Yeah.
in general, I think it works really well. I listened to the Last Jedi commentary recently, and I listened to Zack Snyder's Watchmen commentary. It's also interesting to hear kind of how different directors do commentary, like
Mhm.
what they emphasize, what is important to them.
Have you heard that crazy the Soderbergh commentary with the was it the cinematographer or writer of the Limey?
No.
That is up on Criterion Channel, apparently.
All right.
So it's famously contentious. Like they are straight up arguing about that movie and how they worked on that. So yeah, sounds fantastic. So that's one thing
Interesting.
to check out.
But anyway, basically, I'm saying I'd recommend it. And if you have any commentary files or commentary thoughts you want to share with us, feel free to shoot
Mhm.
them over to /filmcast@gmail.com.
I do feel like this is a missed opportunity for studios to like, hey, you want to entice people to come check out your movies or something? Like, give us more commentaries in podcast form. That's why I really like the Directors Guild podcast for that. Is just like directors talking to each other. You can get some value by offering people a slice of your content or something.
I've also enjoyed kind of the HBO has done podcast episodes with the creator,
Yeah,
or AMC, right? There was a Breaking Bad podcast. There's a Better Call Saul podcast, and also HBO did like a Watchmen one and a Chernobyl one, which I would recommend listening to everything I just said.
all very good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all very good. So, and those are things you can kind of take with you and like walk around and listen to those, and great insight into the filmmaking process from the horse's mouth there. So that's something I've been doing.
It's interesting what this is only tangentially related, but it's interesting what Josh Gad is doing with like his um, from home
Hmm.
reuniting casts from 80s movies.
Yeah.
It just thought of it in the sense that you guys, we're saying it's an opportunity right now. I feel like those things wouldn't have happened if everybody wasn't home. It feels like
Yeah.
he's taking advantage of the fact that people are home and available, and there is kind of a weird opportunity in this moment to create content that maybe wouldn't have been made
Mhm.
otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. Although I will say, here in Seattle, I'm recording this on May 16th. But yesterday was the first date since February where 0 people died from coronavirus.
Hey,
There's
congrats.
0
That's a
deaths from
milestone.
In
coronavirus
Seattle, is that what
in
you're saying?
Seattle. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was actually really, really encouraging because we're starting kind of a phased reopen soon, and we'll see what that
Mhm.
looks like. So, uh, speaking of taking advantage of things while people are at home, I don't know if you guys heard this news, but Hamilton is going to be released early
Oh yeah,
on July 3rd.
Not just early, but like a year early.
It was
early, yeah.
originally supposed to be released in October of 2021. And I think the idea was that they were gonna like wait until all the live performances were over and they'd
But all the live performances are over. So
the live performances are over. So I mean, I think there was even gonna be a theatrical release, right?
That thing had the potential to earn a lot of money theatrically, you know, so this is kind of amazing. And maybe to me, I've been thinking about this, like really shows like everyone is trying to pump up their streaming services right now, and this is Disney's golden goose. They spent a ton of money to acquire the rights to this
around
thing,
like $75 million.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's insane.
it's
But
the,
right now,
Trolls World Tour effect.
exactly. That's what I think. I think of Hamilton and Trolls World Tour.
Trolls World Tour is changing the movie industry single-handedly.
It is
making a shit ton of money. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that to look forward to on July 3rd. Is that it will stream on Disney Plus, right? On July 3rd, which is like wow. That many of us already have Disney Plus, right? So it's just like, hey, you get free Hamilton. Have all of us seen Hamilton live? I know Devindra has. Jeff, have you seen it live?
I have. Yeah.
I have not. I never did.
Oh man, so this is gonna be such a
always
treat
wanted
for you then.
You'll have a chance.
You are gonna freaking love this, Jeff.
I know.
Man.
We many times we're looking at just buying tickets to New York and flying in to see it. It was all kinds of crazy things, and we tried a few times here in LA, and it just never happened. So I've been very much excited to see it. So yeah, I'm excited.
Mhm.
So July 3rd is when you can see it on Disney Plus. Maybe we'll even review it on the podcast. I was thinking that might be something
why not?
we could
Good
do.
idea.
Take that, HBO Max, right? Right? What even is that? I review like tech and streaming services, and I'm very confused about what HBO Max is going to be for a lot of people, other than a new HBO Now. But that's a whole other story.
This one is the Max though.
You all the way up.
Yeah.
Like knob
It's not
down.
just now. It's all of the now.
Mm-hmm.
all of the nows at once existing simultaneously. I wanted to shout out a couple things before we get to what we've been watching as well. One is that it was the 5-year anniversary of Mad Max Fury Road this week, which I know was many of ours favorite movie of the decade, action movie of the decade, one of the greatest movies of all time in my opinion.
Yep.
Kyle Buchanan did a great oral history over at NewYorkTimes.com. I don't know if you guys had a chance to read this, but it was genuinely moving reading this because that movie is so beloved by me and many of us, and it was the oral history confirms what I always suspected, which is that it was wildly difficult to make that movie.
Oh
right?
yeah, and we knew a lot of that at the time, like the fights between Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron and all of that. They shot for what, 6 months in the desert?
It's actually kind of encouraging that you can't just make a movie like that. You know, that it's like, it literally is a trip through a nightmare scenario. You know, like if it was just an easy breezy shoot and they came out with that movie, I'd be like, what? I don't even understand the world anymore.
It basically would shame you for not doing more with your life. Pretty much, right?
Exactly. I
want also that every other movie.
I want that movie to feel like a Herculean effort that, you know, almost ended people. You know, that's what I want. Because it's like, yeah, of course, it's on the screen.
And I think Steven Soderbergh had the best quote on it, where he said, "quote I don't understand how they're not still shooting that film, and I don't understand how hundreds of people aren't dead." End quote.
Exactly.
So this is a great oral history. I think you get a little sense of the conflict between Charlize and Tom Hardy, and also like some of the things they did to prep for the movie were interesting. And the thing that was most like shocking to me was that they ran out of money at one point and almost couldn't shoot the scenes at the beginning and end of the film with Immortan Joe and the big, you know, the thing with all the water coming down, all that stuff. Like, they didn't have it in their budget to shoot it. And Kevin Tsujihara, the since ousted head of WB, took over, saw the movie and was like, you know, let's do this right. And they were able to reshoot it. And like now it's like obviously regarded as a masterpiece, but like it almost came so close to not being the movie that it was because they didn't have enough money to finish it.
Movies are miracles, guys. Like it's crazy. Any of these things get made, especially one where they shot in a desert. Reading like all this stuff and the behind the scenes stuff, it also strikes me just how much faith people put into
A director,
into the director, like into Miller, and actually getting this happening. I can't imagine like a young, inexperienced person, like people would have revolted. Nobody would have sat through that. But like Frank Miller, man, well, George Miller, sorry, George
Yeah,
Miller
George
can
Miller,
make
yeah.
that happen.
Yeah.
And that's because like we know he is a genius, and he's proven that several times. And I don't know, to me that is like I don't find too many things in the world beyond like nature kind of like religious, or giving me that sense of something religious. But man, the faith people put into artists like that is kind of astounding sometimes.
Yeah, the Citadel scenes, by the way, are the ones I was referring to earlier.
Oh man, yeah.
And yeah, it almost didn't get made. Favorite quote from this whole oral history is when George Miller says, "quote When someone is directing a film, they're thinking about it every waking hour and even processing it in their dreams. The problem is, if you're a studio executive, you tend to think about it for 10 minutes on a Wednesday." End quote.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is also a good context for this podcast. If you're a filmmaker, you're thinking about it every waking hour for months. And if you're on the Slash Filmcast, you tend to think about a movie for about 90 minutes every Tuesday or so. So
listen, I think a bad movie will like infest my brain for a week, as certain bad movies tend to, as we'll see later today.
One last thing I wanted to bring up before we get into what we've been watching, which is I read this Cracked article this week that I thought was kind of fun. And I don't know if you guys know this, but like in my opinion, the biggest weaknesses of the Jurassic Park movies, right? Actually, friend of the show, Patrick Williams, made a whole video about this, is that the Jurassic Park movie series divorces the viewer from the protagonist, because the idea of a great horror movie or action movie is like you can relate with the protagonist. Jeff, the canonical example we refer to frequently in the Slash Filmcast is Green Room, right? Like, and I remember the way you described that movie. You're like, in that movie, people are so smart. They're doing things you wish you would have thought of, right?
Right.
That is the opposite of what happens with the Jurassic Park movies, right? Because in the Jurassic Park movies, people do things that are they return to the island in ways that are stupid. Like you would never go back after what's happened, right? But J.M. McNabb over at Cracked.com wrote this article called "Jurassic Park's Strangest Plot Point Now Makes Sense in 2020."
Oh yeah, definitely.
And the idea of like Jurassic World, right? The park isn't just open; it's thriving. What is up with that? Like,
what's up with that?
And here it is like, quote in this article: "When Jurassic World was first released, everything seemed really weird. Would they really reopen Jurassic Park after the tragedies depicted in the first movie? Think about it. If the test run of Universal's Wizarding World of Harry Potter resulted in multiple fatalities and several near child disembowelings, presumably people wouldn't be sucking back butterbeers like it was no big deal just a few years later. And the events of the first movie were well known by the time of Jurassic World. So how would, for instance, Jimmy Buffett sanction building a Margaritaville location on Velociraptor Death Island? For all he knew, his customers would be enjoying their Calypso coconut shrimp on the exact same spot where Newman was horrifically disemboweled."
Yeah. You know what, though? That's a franchisee decision. I think he just approves the franchise, and the franchisees really make they
make the final call, and that's it. They empower the franchisees, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, the article goes on, and it all makes a little bit more sense now. As critic Matt Zoller cites and others on social media pointed out, no one living through 2020's COVID-19 pandemic would ever question the believability of these events, despite the fact that we're in the midst of a global emergency that has killed more Americans than the entire Vietnam War. Many leaders, including the president, are pushing to reopen the U.S. economy against the advice of experts. And we're already seeing people willing to risk their lives and the lives of others to simply get a haircut or watch Vin Diesel get injected with nanotechnology and go on a killing spree.
Absolutely true.
That is a reference to people going back to movie theaters in Texas, by the way. That last bit.
Yep. But the core, like, I think horror of Jurassic Park was also like us not only like testing technology that we didn't have any idea how to handle, but like the unbridled power of capitalism and ways to make a profit whenever possible, and sell things at the danger of everybody else. And then we're willingly doing it. We're just some people are just walking into it. It's not just nefarious corporations trying to get people out there. It is people who demand the privilege and freedom to put themselves in danger. that is the true, like, I don't even think Stephen King could come up with a story of just people being dumb, because we would think it's dumb. We would think it's too unbelievable. In fact, yeah, the current pandemic is just it's being driven by stupidity.
Yeah,
It's insane.
they cut out the scene with all the people protesting with the signs that say, "Let us touch the giant death reptiles.
This
You
is
can't keep us
America.
away."
This is America. I need to see the T-Rex for myself.
It really does. I mean, we're making fun of it, and we should be, but it really
Yeah.
does cast a movie like Jurassic World in a new light to me, which is that
Also,
Yeah.
every movie where they have that every bad movie where they have that terrible scene where the person goes in front of the senator and the senator's like, "I don't believe you, expert." It's like, that is literally happening verbatim in the real world. Literally, literally. Who are you to say? That moment in the movie where, the Jeff Goldblum, like, cool scientist is sitting there and is like, "No, you don't understand that all of the ants are growing to be 500 times their normal size, and we can stop it." And he's like, "Who are you to say?" It's everyone's the mayor from Jaws now. It's literally like the mayor from Jaws seemed like the stupidest person in the world until, oh wait, those are all the people now. Everyone is the fucking mayor from Jaws.
Hey
Now,
guys,
to
I'm
be-
genuinely worried about us as a society. So good luck, everybody.
I don't
Stay safe.
dispute what you're saying, Jeff. I do want to say that, like, certainly in Seattle and many other places, there have been millions of people that are actually trying to do the right thing and trying to listen to experts, right? So do want to point that out. But yes, there are a significant minority whose voices are frequently amplified in media. That
Well, it's not.
don't
Yeah,
agree with
this
that.
is a whole separate thing, Dave. Like, it's not just the protesters, but it's like me walking outside and just seeing like waves of people just like hanging out in the park and walking down the street like nothing is wrong. Like, it's not. Yeah, those protesters are one thing, but man, it does make me feel sad about how people think about their responsibility to others. Yeah, this whole thing is kind of breaking me down slowly. I cannot wait to get out of here and end up moving to a state where things could be even worse, because, yeah, man, there's
Well-
no save. There's
well-
no save here.
Well, the way you describe it certainly sounds exciting. So
Yeah, that is 2020. Life in 2020, no escape. Yeah, no.
Devendra's like, "Man, this frying pan sucks. Can't wait to move into the fire."
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to what we've been watching this week. So I had another Twitch watch party this week. I've been tweeting out my Twitch watch parties, and again chose a movie that was appropriate for a Twitch watch party, which was Abduction, the Taylor Lautner action vehicle.
Why?
And a couple of things I just want to point out about Abduction, which is just that, number one, fascinating movie. That movie has Sigourney Weaver, Maria Bello, Jason Isaacs, Alfred Molina.
Uh-huh.
Amazing cast. It felt to me like I'm sure it felt to me like all these people were kind of these storied actors kind of getting together to kind of hand the baton off to like the next generation, to boot, like, what's the equivalent of like a movie like a bar mitzvah or like quinceañera or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, basically all these amazing actors starring in this schlock to it could be like, Taylor Lautner, you've arrived. And the movie unfortunately isn't very good, but it does have Maria Bello doing martial arts and kicking guys' asses for one scene.
I'd watch that.
And that's amazing. That's amazing. That's amazing. But it's just fascinating that at one point in time, it's a fun cultural artifact that at one point in time, we all thought Taylor Lautner was going to be an action star. And when you think of Team Edward versus Team Jacob, right? Think of the career trajectories of those two guys. It's fascinating, and it's come full circle because Pattinson is now Batman, right? So it's come full circle. Basically, Taylor Lautner just needed a lengthy period where he was doing well-respected indie films, and maybe things would have turned out different for him. But Abduction, not very good movie. I gave it half a star on Letterboxd. Also had a chance to watch The Skywalker Legacy. I actually, did a video with Patrick on my YouTube channel about this, and also watched a bunch of Star Wars stuff. Watched The Director and the Jedi, which is about the making of The Last Jedi, and watched The Skywalker Legacy about the making of Rise of Skywalker. And these are great documentaries, great behind-the-scenes documentaries. uh, I'll just point out a couple things about these. One is that it is really amazing how much work goes into even a bad Star Wars movie, right? And you just, I do think it's worth it to just marvel at the artistry, all the work that went into it. Like we really did not like the Skywalker Legacy on this. Oh, I'm sorry, the Rise of Skywalker on this podcast, but um, everyone worked their ass off on that movie, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's worth just like reflecting on that, honoring that, and I think watching this documentary, The Skywalker Legacy, is a way of honoring that.
You know, the
Um,
same is true about the behind the scenes stuff for Phantom Menace. Man, watching all the featurettes on that Blu-ray and watching all of the work that went into Phantom Menace, it is extraordinary, especially because at that time there was no such thing as a bad Star Wars movie. No one had understood what a bad Star Wars movie could be.
Right.
Everyone who was involved in the Phantom Menace was like, this is the greatest job I could have ever hoped for. And they were all just bringing their A game and showing it to George. And there's all these shots of all the like I mean, dozens of hundreds of to use a Chen term of um concept art images and maquettes and all of the things that you do to prep a Star Wars movie where it's just like, hey, let's be imagination for a while. Let's just be imagination. And man, what a cool thing. I think that featurette almost is better than the movie. It's so
No,
inspiring
definitely.
and
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah.
Well, what's great about the Phantom Menace documentary, which I think is on, you can watch on YouTube, is that it shows how like the process was very challenging and how they didn't at one point, the movie was bad, or they thought the movie was bad,
At
right?
one point?
At one point,
Can you imagine?
Unfortunately, that point is still happening today.
we are still living in it. But no, that there's a screening of the movie and they come out and they look like shell shocked. Right? They just look like things are not going well. Whereas what's fascinating about the Skywalker Legacy and also the Force Awakens documentary is the story. That was the second point I was going to bring up. Is the story that those documentaries tell is, oh, this is great. This is so much fun. Everyone had a great time. Whereas those out of the three movies, those were the most challenging to make. On the other hand, The Last Jedi, as far as we all understand, had the smoothest production, right? Like the story was locked by the time Force Awakens was out. Everyone had a great time working with Ryan Johnson. But the documentary called The Director and the Jedi, it's a great 90-minute documentary. It's very much like, here's an unproven, franchise director. Like he's never made a big franchise movie like this. He has really different ideas. It's framed as, we're not sure if this is going to work, right? And that's the Director and the Jedi. And it's called The Director and the Jedi because Mark Hamill outright says, I disagree with Ryan Johnson's vision of this character.
Yeah.
But
which is so much more interesting, I think. Like that documentary, I don't know. It was combative in a way that was interesting. Yeah.
It's fascinating, basically, the meta narrative of that these narratives, these documentaries tell the story that episode 7 and 9 were super smooth and awesome, and episode 8 was challenging. But in fact, the opposite was true of all three of those movies. And I think it speaks to maybe like when you're confident in the final movie product. This is just like guessing, right? But like when you're confident in the final movie product, you can kind of maybe show more like warts and all the making of. But when things are challenging, you're like, okay, we need to project an air of confidence. That's just a guess. But in any case, would recommend that the Skywalker Legacy hit Disney Plus this week. That's how I watched it. And the Directing the Jedi also on Disney Plus. Would recommend it, and you can check out the video that Patrick and I made on my YouTube channel. Devindra, what have you been watching this week?
Oh, sure. Well, let me tell you guys, and you'll hear more about this during our review, but let's just say after watching Capone, I was a little shell-shocked. I was a little drained of the potential for cinema, just a bit. Then I watched The Eddy, which is the new Netflix show directed by a couple episodes directed by Damien Chazelle, created by Jack Thorne. This is a show starring Andre Holland. It is about jazz. It's about music. Can you imagine that coming from Damien Chazelle? It's about a jazz club in Paris that's kind of like struggling, and it's a dream club for Andre Holland to kind of get this thing off the ground. And it is just like, it feels like a gritty French independent movie in so many ways. Like, I could tell. I mean, I'm mainly watching this because I love Damien Chazelle, and I'll watch anything he puts his name to. But the first episode of this is just really exploring Andre Holland and like how this club is struggling, how he's working with his partner. Nothing can seem to be going right. But then there are these moments of just greatness of people playing music at the club, or Andre Holland's character trying to form a relationship with his daughter, having like makeshift concerts with people in Paris. It is I'm really digging it. It is like shot in this like almost verite style. Like it's very lots of handheld shots, lots of close-ups. It feels like just a really interesting experiment for Damien Chazelle. And it's kind of a crime movie too, because like gangsters are involved eventually, and like there's drama around the club and everything. I've only seen the first episode, but I am fully on board. This thing, and the first episode itself was like movie length, I believe. I'm just really digging it. It is a chill show about music and people like chasing their dreams, and I love seeing Andre Holland in these roles. And people trying to find meaning in their lives. It kind of reminds me of Treme, which is a fantastic show that few people watched, but it lasted for a long while on HBO. So if you dug that show, or if you just like are interested in Damien Chazelle and how he explores music, that's something I've been into with him since Whiplash. Like this is a guy who understands the struggle and the like heartache and everything involved with leading a music career, and it just kind of comes through in all his stuff. So yeah, check it out. I think you guys would appreciate this, just on a creative level.
That's the Eddie, and I've heard great things about it, so I'm actually looking forward to checking it out.
Yeah, it's really good.
So Eddie, you watched the first episode. Anything else you've been watching, Devindra?
Also, another Netflix show I've been checking out, The Midnight Gospel, which is Pendleton
yeah.
Ward's new show. The Adventure Time guy, and it is something special. It is basically a podcast show, but animated in a really trippy way. It's about this like this character who has a machine to jump into alternate universes, like or multiple, like another universe, to have people on his like galactic podcast, and they talk about whatever. They talk about the meaning of life, or anything. um and usually while this is happening, the place he's visiting is going through some sort of apocalypse. So it's like really discordant like animation. There's like a visual story being told about what's happening in the world that is not always related to the conversation they're having, but I found it really compelling. The first episode, he goes to this planet that's suffering a zombie invasion. The president is played by Dr. Drew, and he just sits and has a conversation with Dr. Drew while they like fight off zombies, and try to save that society. It's really weird. It's really trippy. I love the look of it. I've always loved, the way Adventure Time looks, and there's a lot of like great traditional animation here. And it's just like really chill and interesting. I believe it also uses clips from Duncan Trussell's podcasts, and I've never listened to any of his shows, but I'm going to go back and check some of those out now, because it's just like a lot of conversations with really interesting people. Stephen Root's in this, Maria Bamford, a lot of cool people as like guests too, like the people who are guesting on the show. I think for both of you guys and anybody who likes listening to podcasts, it's a really interesting experience. I just love how trippy it is. It doesn't look like anything else on TV. It is absolutely fascinating. So yeah,
Yeah,
check it
I
out.
watched I watched a few of these, and I thought, hearing the description of it, it was going to be my jam. I was
Yeah,
like, this
yeah.
is perfect. It's like musings on deep philosophical issues. The Dr. Drew episode is all about like,
Mhm.
is there a good drug? Is there such
Yeah.
a thing as good and bad drugs?
It's sort of like My Dinner with Andre, your favorite thing of two people talking, but
Right.
framed around like, these crazy things happening.
But like injected with
Yeah.
the sci-fi element. But man, it just didn't work for me. I
Yeah.
wanted to love it, and the what you're looking at and what you're hearing are so disparate. It's like there's no linking. It is literally just, like for example, that first episode,
Mhm.
you're watching a zombie apocalypse, and you're watching the president of the United States shoot zombies in the head from the roof of the White House,
Uh-huh.
animated in this, very abstract
He's
style.
very chill about it too. Like he's not
Yeah.
like
He's chill
worried.
about it because the audio is from him talking about, it's from
Yeah.
a podcast that had nothing to do with any of this. And then they like recorded little bits where he'll be like, oh, pick up that gun, or, the zombies are coming, or whatever it is. But there's these tiny little linking bits, but most of the show
Yeah.
is this audio that was not ever intended to have these visuals in front of it. which is such a cool idea, but ultimately just it didn't fuse together into it didn't add up to anything greater than the sum of its parts for me. And
That's
I
fair.
wanted
That's
it
fair.
to. I really
Yeah.
wanted it to.
It's a very specific mood. It feels like the ultimate Adult Swim show of like, Adult Swim has always been great about having like a really interesting, unique animated things. This feels like going kind of all the way with even like higher production, and it is very weird. I just kind of love that we're at a time where something weird like this can exist, and like maybe it's for like, a very small niche population, but I am among that, and I'm digging it. Yeah, I don't know if it changes much. I haven't finished it, Jeff, but yeah, I'm glad you gave it a shot.
Maybe it's the Capone of animated series.
Spoilers.
Who knows?
I had the same reaction as Jeff. I had heard amazing things about the Midnight Gospel on Netflix, and then I started watching it, and I was like, "This isn't for me." I was like, I got 10 minutes in. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do this. Sorry,
It's just too much.
it's just not for me. It's not for me. I'm not saying it's not good.
One
It's
of
just
those
not for me.
things. Yeah,
So
it's one of those things that also shows the full like the limitless potential of animation. You could just do
Yeah.
anything. And I just love the style and kind of how they go into it. Every episode looks different. There's so many different creatures and so many different ways they imagine different worlds. Like the second one is about like this crazy clown planet, and it's something else. So it's something for when I feel like the world is too much, everything is too crazy. I can sit down and like look at this weird exploration of life and meaning and crazy animation. So I'm enjoying it in that respect.
all right, that's the Midnight Gospel and the Eddie on Netflix. Jeff, what have you been watching this week?
Well, I'll start with an animated show that I watched that's called Solar Opposites. This is the new show from Justin Roiland of Rick and Morty fame. And you know how you guys are old enough to remember when The Simpsons was going strong, and then all of a sudden they announced they were going to do a sci-fi Simpsons. They're going to do this show called Futurama.
Yeah, the one about the killer, the sassy robot that we've always been hearing about. Yeah.
Yeah. And they announced it, and I, for one, tuned in. I know a lot of people absolutely adore Futurama, but when I tuned in, I was like, oh, this is just like The Simpsons.
Mm-hmm.
It just felt a little too, it was weird. It lived in the same animation style, but it was different. It was the same, but different. I never got into Futurama is what I'm saying, but a lot of people did. Now, imagine if Futurama was introduced, but it was about a slightly overweight, balding, dumb father and his wife who has really tall hair, and two kids. One is a smart girl and the other is a kind of a smart aleck boy. But it was in space and it had exactly the same animation style. I mean, that's kind of what Solar Opposites is.
Wow.
Solar Opposites is the show you just described, or it's like that in the sense that it copies another show?
It is that, but to Rick and Morty.
I see.
It's like if you like Rick and Morty, you'll probably like Solar Opposites because it's the same show. It is a palette swap for Rick and Morty.
Man.
What? And I forgot to mention, what if Futurama also had the same voice actors doing the same characters, but
That's
this
not
time they're in
good.
space? That is not to say I sound very snarky and pejorative.
Mhm.
That is not to say I didn't enjoy Solar Opposites. I liked it very much. I like Rick and Morty very much. It's the same show with the same voice actors playing the same characters in the same rhythm, doing the same thing. They're aliens in this case, but there's like a dad alien who's basically Rick. He has advanced technology that the humans don't understand, and he talks because he's voiced by the same voice actor. He talks in the same rhythm. It's just instead of he's talking, like Rick does, he's just talking in his normal voice. But it's the same pattern of joke. Anyway, again, it sounds like I'm being very negative, but just because I was kind of shocked that somebody was just like, "Hey, give us Rick and Morty again."
That's surprising. Like, I think the thing that really worked about Futurama, by the way, is that eventually, I think within the first season, it became something very different than The Simpsons. Like, it's meaner, it's snarkier, it has like a very different sense of humor at times because they didn't share every single writer. Like, they did have a lot of new talent. So, like, it began to feel like a very different thing. Because it's from Justin Roiland and it's all Justin Roiland, I guess it's hard to be different, right?
It's really good. I liked it a lot because I like Rick and Morty, and it has the same feel. So if you like it, I would give it a shot. I watched it on Hulu. I think it's a FX on Hulu show. I think. But yeah, I'm digging it. It's just really crazy to me that it's the same animation style, the same voice actors, the same dynamic of like a younger kid who's going along with the older crazy inventor who doesn't understand humans, and it's the same dynamic.
And Rick and Morty itself started out as like a Back to the Future sort of like parody type thing. So he's
Rick
doing
and
it
Morty
again.
Is Doc and Marty. It's not not a stretch.
That's Solar Opposites on Hulu right now. What else have you been watching, Jeff?
Also watched almost all of Dead to Me season 2. I really
it's so good. Yeah.
Oh man, I really disagree with that.
Oh wow. Because we all enjoyed season 1 of Dead to Me.
Right? I loved season 1.
Yeah.
Loved season 1. I do not understand what is going on with season 2.
I agree. There is a lot because like season 1 was all about like crazy twists and them like really trying to like ramp up the drama of what's happening. If I was halfway through season 2, Jeff, I would probably agree with you. Because I think it starts strong and kind of starts to lag a little. There is some great stuff towards the end that I think makes it worth it. But
I wanted to finish it before I talked about it, but we're taking next week off, and so I just thought I'd bring it up now because I don't know if we're gonna finish it. My wife and I are like, it's a short, half an hour episodes. Mm-hmm. We probably will, but the first episode back, I felt like it just retconned itself. It's so weird.
It does a weird thing. Yeah,
it does a super weird thing. Like, what are you doing? Show you set up this amazing cliffhanger at the end of season 1, which I won't reveal, but at the beginning of season 2 they're like nah.
I found that kind of ballsy.
Now I gotta watch the first episode of this.
Dude, it's some like soap opera bullshit.
You have to watch the first 2 episodes of the new season actually, Dave, to understand what happened.
First 2 episodes. The first 2 episodes for sure. Because the second episode is the one where they're like, "This is what we're doing," and I'm like, "This is what you're doing. Like, this is what we're doing."
It is weird. It's weird and soap opera-y. I will say, like, depending on how far along you are, Jeff, like the second, I think it's the 9th episode, whatever the second to last episode of the season is tremendous. There is some like Emmy level work there where I think like the craziness just kind of comes home basically, and they have to like reckon with everything that's happening. And I found it astounding. Great performances from everybody, but especially Linda Cardellini, who I love.
Yeah, no, I mean we're gonna be talking about Linda Cardellini a lot this episode. She's great. She's always great. I love Christina Applegate in this. I thought the first season, I thought she deserved an Emmy. Like I was so high on this show, could not wait for season 2 to start. And I just feel like they didn't even honor what they set up. It's like
right.
You set up this really tantalizing season 2 premise, and then they're just like, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. We screwed up. I'm sorry. Forget we did that. It's crazy to me. And ultimately, it felt cheap and not as interesting. And then they introduced these new characters that I feel like is very shoehorned in. I don't know. I just feel like. I hope it circles around by the end of the season.
That's the exact same complaint I had about Ozark season 3. Remember?
So true.
So true. So now I need to watch just to understand what Jeff's opinion of a shoehorned in character is.
I think you'd have many opinions on this season, Dave.
All right.
So I hope you guys watch it. I do want to say it is I love that Natalie Morales is in this because I love her as an actor and I love seeing her in everything. And like she forms a friendship with Linda Cardellini, it feels like a thing that was made specifically for me. Like here are 2 actors I've always enjoyed. I feel like they elevate everything. They kind of, anything they touch, they kind of make it a little better. And to see them be friends and be chummy on a show together, I don't know. Felt like somebody just peeked into my brain there.
All right. Jeff, anything else to be watching real quick?
Yeah, the thing I've been watching most, honestly, real quickly, is something that was suggested to me by a friend of the show, Danish Syed, who is awesome with giving me great recommendations of things to watch. This is actually a YouTube series. And this is not somebody that needs any recommendation from me. He's got multiple millions of subscribers. Have you guys ever heard of Luke Towan?
No, I haven't.
Okay, This is a YouTube channel, Luke Towan. It's a YouTube channel all about building models, building very high quality, photorealistic, like railroad set scale models. and it is hours of content. He's an Australian guy. He's got this very listenable Australian accent, very calming, very serene, and he just steps you through this process that is intricate, detailed, patient, and completely watchable from my point of view. This is peak coronavirus content right here for me. This is lockdown, quarantine, ease my mind at the end of the night. I've watched so many hours of this guy. The easy comparison is Bob Ross, but it's not Bob Ross. Like Bob Ross is all about
right,
happy little trees and kind of creating this reassuring environment. Luke Towan doesn't care about that. He's just explaining what he's doing. He's explaining to you, assuming that you want to do what he does. What he does is so far beyond my skill set that I can't even, like, there are things that he does in this that require so much patience and attention to detail. And I'm like, but I love watching it. I am not that guy. I could never do any of this stuff. Because he's got an X-Acto knife and he's cutting these tiny little things out, and then
yeah.
I
don't know how model builders work, honestly. Like I cannot conceive of having that attention to detail. It's insane.
So wonderful to watch it right now, though. It puts my mind at ease. It's like his control over his little world that he is step by step working through. There's a beginning, a middle, and end. It all makes sense. It's all beautiful. The creations that he comes up with are mind-bogglingly complex, and he shoots them in a way, when he's done with them, he shoots them in a way where you would go, oh, that's a real full-size real thing that he just took a picture of, but it's this tiny little model he made. Anyway, I highly recommend it if you are like me and have an addled brain during this time, and things that you used to enjoy you can't quite focus on, and dark entertainment feels a little too dark right now. Oh, let me introduce you to Luke Towan. It just makes me so happy to watch this process unfold in front of me, and he's great. It's great.
That's Luke Towan on YouTube, Towan. And yeah, some good competence porn. We could all use some
Definitely.
Of that. We could all use some of that. Before we move on, we got to thank the people who donated to this podcast. Big thanks to subscribers at the rate of $2 per month: William Wright, Mick Yasgami, and Armando Ferrari. Ferrari is a pretty cool name, I think, pretty badass. Also thanks to donors Stephen Theus, Stuart Lindsay from Aurora, Canada, Salvatore Monardo from Point Pleasant, New Jersey, very generous donation, and Gabe from Manchester, England, also very generous donation. Appreciate you guys. Thanks also to Abe Sutton, who writes in, gentlemen, I write to you from the battlefield at Gettysburg as we prepare to cross the threshold and clash with our brethren from the south. Our rations are thin, and the bitter cold would chill the bones of even the strongest among us. To pass the time, we act out moving pictures within our platoon and look forward to the commentary from you three noblemen to add much-needed nuance to our charades. Dave, I beg you, please read this message to thine listeners with great haste, as our time on this earth may be short. Abe Sutton, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, June 30th, 1863.
The point he's trying to make is that he sent this a long time ago, Dave. Sent this a long time ago.
That is correct, Jeff. I think you're right about that.
Just getting around to reading it now. He sent it a long time ago.
If you are interested in supporting the show with a donation, you just go to paypal.me/filmcast, paypal.me/thewordfilmcast. It's a tough time for everyone right now, so do not donate if it in any way causes you any hardship whatsoever. If you want to support us by doing something that can be done for free, go to the Apple Podcast link and leave us a review or a star rating. Just takes a few seconds. We would really appreciate it. All that said, let's get to our review of Capone.